bookkeeping and accounting. In previous businesses, I did all of that. So, I had a car dealership doing $16 million a year, and I did all the bookkeeping and accounting, which was a complete waste of my time. I could have hired somebody for $8 or $10 an hour to be doing that same task, and instead I was doing that myself.
You're asking yourself, why am I doing this?
Smart people would know how to use all these different tools. They start with something small.
And never get your entire organization. If you don't pull off operations, don't give up.
It can be as small as that.
I think you guys are going to have our last today.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Delegate That podcast, where we discuss the art and science of delegation, business management, and leadership. I, as always, am your host, Adam Labar, and today I'm really looking forward to having another conversation with Alan Underwood. Alan, you and I chatted on the Biz Dad podcast twice now, actually. So you were on episode 45 quite a while back, and now we just recorded another one not too long ago. So that one has not been released yet. Well, maybe by the time this comes out, it will have been. So be on the lookout for that. If you want to know more about Alan on the personal side of the house, you'll hear a ton of personal stuff there. But for now, Alan, let's jump into some business. Give me an introduction of yourself and your business.
Well, awesome. Thanks, Adam. It's good to have a conversation with you again. This time, more business and personal focus. So that'll be different and fun. Introduction of me. So I am a husband, been married 26 years to my wife, Stephanie. So she's put up with the entrepreneurial journey that we've been on and my business ADD for the last 26 years. We have 8 kids. And so outside of work, that keeps me plenty busy. 2 grandkids. And what I'm dedicated to right now, business-wise, are really 2 main things. The first one is the Momentum Capital Group. It's a private equity investment company. We do real estate development in San Diego. And then the second thing is coaching for high performance couples and individuals and helping them up-level their lives, create a vision for who they want to become, and then help them execute on that vision.
Do you feel overwhelmed with mundane tasks that eat up your valuable time? It's time to reclaim your schedule and focus on what truly matters. Get your time back with elite remote talent without the time zone hassle. Delegate $10 an hour tasks to focus on your $1,000 an hour tasks. Schedule your free strategy call at wisevas.io.
That's awesome. Yeah, you and I chatted a lot about that on the other podcast as well. So I'm looking forward to digging into it a little bit here on the more of the business aspects. But how did you get involved in raising capital and doing real estate development? Right. So is that a semi-new thing, or have you been doing that for a while?
So that's the last 2 years has been capital raising. The 3 years before that, I was involved in my own real estate projects, primarily in Arizona, flipping houses, did some rentals as well with a couple of different partners in Arizona. And certainly the raising capital piece initially wasn't the intent when I got into real estate. I was learning how to do it for myself. And then as I learned more about real estate, just as with anything else, we have different superpowers. And I certainly am not a superpower in underwriting, not a creative genius when it comes to construction or development or anything like that. But I place a really high value on relationships and helping other people accomplish their goals. And that's really the primary job of anybody that's raising capital, or it should be, is what can I give this other person? And, that is certainly my hope with the raising that we're doing, is if I can help people build equity in their portfolio and achieve financial freedom, location freedom, time freedom, then I consider that a big win for myself. And not all that really started with education. I attended some conferences, learned about it, and then started on a small scale bringing capital in to help with the flips I was doing in Arizona. And then what I'm doing in San Diego is just been a much larger version of that. We've done about $14 million in capital raised in the last 2 years. So.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned the superpower side of the house, because that's one of those things that the only way to really lead and delegate is to know what your superpower is and find other people's superpowers and kind of enhance those in the positions that you need filled. So as you've kind of built out your businesses, well, I should say, let's focus on Momentum Capital for a moment. As you've kind of filled that out and like, hey, these are the people I need in the actual development. These are the people that I need in actually managing the projects. These are the people that I need in all these things. How did you kind of separate yourself a little bit to know that you're focusing on only what you are capable of, or I shouldn't say only what you're capable of, but the things that only you are capable of, not only, and it's a little slight change in just the audio of that one, but you are the one that needs to do X, Y, and Z. You let other people do the other things. You may be able to do it, but it's somebody else needs to manage that because it's their superpower. How did you kind of step aside, understand which pieces to put in which place, and make it happen?
Well, I think there's two parts to that. And for people who, like me, have sometimes maybe struggled with delegation, I'll just say that I'm much better at it now. Case in point, prior businesses, I never had a personal assistant, and really didn't even know that that was an option, and have since, I think that I will always have a personal assistant now, somebody that can handle the little things that are necessary in a business, but bog down executing on vision. Things like email and scheduling and research. My assistant is great at that. She's the doer and I'm the seer, right? Another example is bookkeeping and accounting. In previous businesses, I did all of that. So, I had a car dealership doing $16 million a year, and I did all the bookkeeping and accounting, which was a complete waste of my time. I could have hired somebody for $8 or $10 an hour to be doing that same task, and instead I was doing that myself. So I've gotten better, and there's still a process with that. With any new business, we're only 2 years in. There are things like investor relations and capital raising where there are people much better at that than I am. And the next real transition of our business is bringing in somebody better than me at the job that I'm currently doing. But for the beginning part of this business, that's what needed to be done and where I was most suited. My business partner is much more suited to the construction and development side. That's where his specialties lie. And so I filled that role. But it's also something that we're actively looking to fill with somebody else so that I can step into really what is my superpower. I love public speaking, connecting with higher level relationships. So instead of a $50,000 or $100,000 investor, connecting with $1 million investor or $5 million investor, where I can bring that kind of value to the business and expand the top of our funnel by speaking on stages and those activities that really are more in line with who I am and what I want to do, and allow that middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel be filled by somebody who has superpowers as a salesperson, which I do not, don't pretend to, not something I want to do, but it is what I do right now.
Now, you said you owned a car dealership for a long time. That's a bunch of sales stuff that's involved in that. Were you at the higher, you owned it, sounds like. So were you at the higher end of that, or were you doing some of the sales on the ground too?
So knowing that, at heart, I'm not a thoroughbred salesperson, those were always roles I had somebody else doing. Now, I would help friends and family, and I doubt that if you asked any of them, they would say the same thing. They would probably say that I was a great salesperson. But I know myself better than, other people do. And I think if there were any point that I was going to make on today's show, it would actually be about the things that you should not delegate than what you should. I think it's easy to identify what you should delegate. But things that you shouldn't delegate are things like your identity, your vision, your legacy. And those are things that you need to be very careful about, being intentional about developing yourself and guarding those. And so rather than allowing somebody else tell me who I am and what I'm going to do. I decide that for myself. So I establish my own identity. I set my own vision. I determine my own legacy. And those are things that I don't think you should delegate, which is kind of contrary to what we're talking about today, but also
no,
important.
I think it's exactly what we're talking about today, because that's a part of the that is all should be a part of everybody who's listening's life is, what is my legacy? What is it that, what is my identity? Where is my identity rooted? And too often our identity does get rooted maybe in the business that we're running, or maybe in something else, right? Which leads us to not be able to manage it the way we should, because we're saying, oh, only I can do this and only I can do that. And, well, this is my baby. I need to be able to. And it's like, no, when you step back and say, okay, where is my actual identity? Your identity's not in a building. Your identity's not in an LLC. Your identity's not in any of that. That could burn down tomorrow, and you still are the person you are. So what is it that it's rooted in? So I love that you mentioned that. So how did you kind of get to the point where you thought about it in that way to say, hey, these, like, I can delegate anything other than these? Like you mentioned 3 things: identity, vision, and legacy. How did you get to that point where you're just like, these things we cannot delegate? I have to know that I'm the owner and possessor and driver of these things.
And I would actually answer that with a question: is how many people listening aren't really sure of who they are? They know what they do. They'll say I am an accountant, but really what they do is accounting, right? Or they'll say I am a salesperson, but what they really do is they sell, right? But understanding who you are is deeper than that. And for me, that took, really personal crises to take me to the point where I had to really separate what I was doing from who I was and get clarity on that. And, some people maybe are smarter than me and they get to that, before they're 45 years old. For me, that's just how long it took. But now, having clarity on who I am, what makes me happy, what turns my crank, I can then take who I am and apply it to anything that I do. And what I do becomes an extension of who I am rather than defining me. So right now, the business is raising capital, momentum capital. The business is coaching. But who I am at heart is what drives all of those things. And, that came as, discovering my core values, which for me is making a difference, autonomy, leadership, relationships, trust, all of those adventure, all of those things are core values, and I can take those core values and apply them to whatever I'm doing. And there's a lot of different ways to get there. But, there's a lot of resources online that can help with that. Working with a coach to help me uncover those things and develop, my own identity has been critical. Vision, I think, is, key to anything. A lot of people don't stop and, even have a conversation about where do I want to be in a year? Where do I want to be in 3 years? And then, how does that serve that who I am in developing that person to a greater extent? So, that's a really long way of saying I had to figure that out before I could move forward, because, of, again, the personal tragedies that I experienced, forced me to rock bottom. And, when you're at rock bottom, the good news is you can't go any further down. And so you have to build up from there. And for me, that was the most critical component, is just discovering who I was, so I could take steps forward.
I greatly appreciate the topic of, I'm not an accountant, I do accounting, right? Let's not turn a verb into a noun. Like, let's not assign that to you as this is who you are. And we talk about that a lot as a former military guy for our military folks. Like, your identity ends up being in your uniform. And then when you take that uniform off, it's gone. Like, where does it go? Like, my identity's hung up in a closet. I still once in a while, my old Blues uniform with my ribbon rack on it is still hanging up in my closet. I haven't put it in the attic. And it's like, man, that so many people hold on to just that and they can't walk away from it. And it's difficult. So if you can separate the verb from the noun, like, just because you do something doesn't mean you are that thing, right? And that I absolutely loved that you said that and pushed that forward. So How do you I know you do this in the coaching side of the house, but I'm curious, how would you apply trying to teach that maybe to your team? Like, let's look at this from a leadership perspective. Like, I want to know that the people that are on my team are excited to be in here, but I don't want their identity tied into what we're doing. I know the military wants that because you're talking about like, hey, you're putting your life on the line. Your identity is in this, but in our businesses, I want folks who really love to be there. I'm teaching them a ton. I'm motivating them to move forward, but I don't want their identity built into my business. How do you kind of coach that in your employees?
Well, I think the first thing is becoming aware of who they are as people, right? So often we hire someone to fill a role and then we treat them as that role, right? This is my assistant. That's all that she does. Well, no, she's a person outside of that who has likes and interests and goals and dreams and desires. And, as leaders, I think one of our most important responsibilities is understanding the goals, dreams, and visions that the people that are working with us and for us have. Number one, because if our vision for them isn't bigger than their vision for them, they're going to go somewhere else. And number two is, we all succeed to the extent that we build the people around us. And you can't build somebody without really knowing who they are and what their goals and dreams are. And, there's a real easy framework from that is when you start a meeting, how do you start? Do you ask somebody to report on what they do? Or do you ask them to share who they are? If you're in my organization, Adam, do I sit down and say, hey, tell me how the KPIs went this week? Well, I had 12 sales calls and I got one contract signed. And you're like, okay, great, get back to work. Or I'm like, hey, Adam, tell me about a personal win this week. What was meaningful for you? What is a personal goal that you have for this week coming up? Oh, well, I went to my kid's football game and, that was really meaningful for me. And that leads you now into seeing that person as a person first. And then, you're going to have to check in on KPIs and whatever, but do we really know the people that we're working with, or are we treating them like a factor of production?
Yeah, I like that a lot. So I'd say that there's a lot of entrepreneurs that really struggle with that sort of thing, just because they're so focused on driving. What sort of tips would you give somebody that to actually like come across authentic in that, right? Because the first couple times it's probably going to feel forced. Like, oh, how was your week? And this weekend, like they're just so uncomfortable because they're only thinking about this. But I think that connection with your employees is extremely important. How would you coach somebody, guide somebody in becoming more authentic and actually caring about what their employees are doing?
Well, ask powerful questions, right? And there's a simple framework that I teach my clients. It's called the RAPID framework, and it's any interaction you have with someone, whether it's with an employee or with a potential customer, you start with establishing rapport, and that rapport has to be done at a personal level. And then you can move from there by setting the agenda for your meeting. You can let them know, but then the very next thing is you're going to go back almost to rapport by asking penetrating questions. And then you're going to introduce, the solutions or the instructions or whatever it is that you're providing. And then the D is a decision with the deadline. But, the most important part of that is the very beginning where you're connecting with the person that you're with, and you can't skip that step. The people that you're working with, they might show up for the money, they might show up because they need a job, but people are really only going to stay if they feel valued and appreciated, and you can't do that if you're just treating them like a machine. And so I don't think you can fake it. You have to. That's part of the leader determining what their identity is, right? So, when I'm working with a leader, that's part of what we talk about is, and in the very beginning stages, Adam, of writing a book where I talk about 2 words that can change anyone's life, and there's a framework in 5 minutes of being able to do that of saying, I am, fill in the blank, I choose, fill in the blank, I feel, fill in the blank, and then thank you. and you fill in the blank. And you can apply that with your desire as a leader. I am someone who cares about the people in my organization. I choose to ask questions about their life and understand their family situation. I feel more connected when I act in accordance with that identity and I make those choices. And I say thank you to the people that are serving me or serving with me. So in a simple 5-minute framework, just working through that, I am, I choose, I feel, thank you. You can change your life and the lives of other people very quickly.
I love that. When I'm looking at it and I'm saying, all right, one of the things I struggled with, I did a bunch of criminal investigations and counterintelligence work for a long time, right? So I would be, I may be sitting across from a child predator, right? And I have to be friends with this person. And, that's extremely difficult. I'm not actually going to be friends with this person, but I need them to think I am, right? So this is where I had to fake it. But it came down to, this is not a fake. I am fulfilling a task that needs to be done because I actually care about the outcome of the case. It's not because I care about this person sitting in front of me that has done these terrible things. It's because I care about a case. And then when I transfer that to business, I think to myself, okay, I care about how well my business turns out. I know that I need good quality employees that want to be here. That means I need to know that they need to know that I feel connected to them. So even if at first it's like, man, this is so difficult to think about the outcome. Why are you actually needing that relationship with that person? Why do you need to sit down and talk with them? Well, because you want them to be a long-lasting employee that cares about your company, that is going to be doing good things. And the only way to do that is if they care about you and they want to stay with you. So have that relationship, build it, have that rapport. And at the beginning of every one of our investigations or at the interrogations or interviews, rapport was always the first thing. Build rapport in one way, shape, or form. Find something you can actually build rapport off of because it makes a massive difference in people's lives. I mean, I've literally had, again, child predators, because of the rapport you build at the beginning, admit that they've done all these terrible things. And you're like, oh, wonderful, great. Or, drug smugglers or insert whatever here, right? And it's the same thing. That's why I love being able to talk to folks from all sorts of different businesses, because you can pull so many different ideas from other walks of life. That's one of the things I love about GoBundance is there's so many different walks of life that you're like, man, I can learn something from that guy that I would have never thought I could do in real estate. That's crazy. So I love that. The rapid that you had, their rapport, agenda, penetrating questions, introduce what you're providing, what you're trying to get done. And then have a deadline at the end. I love that framework. And I definitely loved what was it? I didn't get to write that one down, but I am,
I choose, I feel, and thank you. So 2 words, 5 minutes, unlimited opportunity by just applying that framework. It's the same framework that I use when I'm building a personal or corporate vision. Who do I want to be? Who do we want to be? What are the choices that I have to make or that we have to make to establish that identity? If one of the things on my vision board was this health challenge that I'm doing right now, the identity that I wanted was somebody that's fit, somebody that's muscular. Well, if that's the identity that I'm choosing, what are the decisions that are going to support that identity? What does that guy do every single day without fail? And then doing that, and then I feel is, your feelings are really ultimately what everybody's going for with whatever task they're doing. You want to close an investment because you want that feeling of success, or you want the feeling of helping somebody. You want to be successful in the investigation because you want to feel like you've served justice, or whatever the motivating underlying feeling is. We're all searching for those feelings. So I just pre-program that. If my identity is somebody who's healthy and the choice that I make is to go to the gym, I've already decided that when I leave the gym, I'm going to feel more attractive. I'm going to feel more energized. So my brain isn't wondering, how am I going to feel about this? I've already told it, this is how you're going to feel. And then just expressing gratitude elevates everything. You can't have a problem if it's something you can say thank you for. So if you can say thank you for anything that's going on in your life, you can eliminate all of the problems that you have.
That was powerful. I hope everybody rewinds this last couple of minutes and listens to that again. That's I'm really glad I asked you to repeat those again, because that's I love the passion you have behind that, and obviously that I'm sure comes out in a lot of your coaching programs. So one thing I'm going to shift gears quite a bit here. Right before we started recording, you mentioned that your assistant has been out on basically sick leave, and I want to kind of go through that a little bit, because that obviously has shifted what you're doing on a daily basis. So when you brought in an assistant, what did that look like? Why did you feel like you needed to bring in an assistant? What did they take off your table? And now what is it feeling like now that you're kind of missing that at the moment?
Well, I'm going to rewind a little bit further than that, because it's necessary to understanding why that was a challenge for me. So prior to selling my last business, we had some legal action that was fraudulent. It was brought by a disgruntled employee. But I left that situation telling myself I will never have employees again. If this is what is possible from one bad employee, what it cost me financially, emotionally, physically, everything, it was a huge draw, and I just didn't want that again. So as I went into flipping houses and doing other things, I would have partners, but I didn't want any employees. Well, fast forward, now we're raising capital, and we've got 80 or 100 investors. There's multiple events every month. I kept having people around me from GoBundance and other networks saying, hey, you need to hire someone to take things like scheduling, email, sending stuff to podcast hosts, whatever your branding. And I was very reluctant to do that because of the prior experience. Finally got to a point where I felt comfortable with that and hired the assistant that I have now. And wow, what an accelerant that was to take. You just don't realize how many hours are being consumed by simple, somebody sending an email saying, hey, when can we meet? Well, now you've got 3 or 4 emails going back and forth. It's going to occupy brain time. It's going to occupy minutes, where now I didn't have to worry about that at all. An appointment showed up on my calendar and things got handled. And, the timing of her getting sick, it was also, perfect in the grand scheme of, I think sometimes God has a sense of humor, is that we were literally in the middle of transitioning everything from one calendar and one email account to another one. I went on vacation for a week, and that project was supposed to be wrapped up while I was on vacation. Well, when I got back, she was sick, and all of that was halfway done. So now I had half of my life on one calendar, half on another calendar, half in one email inbox, half in another, and other big projects that she was working on that now I had no idea where we were at because I had completely delegated it. And to say that it's been chaos for the last 3 or 4 weeks would be an understatement. And, I'm feeling certainly a lot more gratitude for what she was doing that, maybe I wasn't as aware of, acknowledging, there's room for improvement on my side to be more appreciative and express more gratitude. But also the recognition that, like I said before, I don't ever want to be without an assistant, because I can recognize the accelerating force in having other good people around you. And I just recently was at an event with Ben Hardy, and he had said something that I probably would have been very resistant to even just a few years ago, but he said that your goal should be to become average in your organization. Well, up until this point in my entrepreneurial journey, I've always wanted to be and been the rock star, because that allowed a certain degree of control and ego, right? But sitting down and thinking about it, what if I was just average? What could my organization be accomplishing if I were just an average team member? And that is something extremely exciting to think about now, is how can I become average? And so that's one of the goals that's on the vision board now is how does Alan become average? And just watching to see how delegating to people better than me would be, because that's going to be a new experience.
For sure. Yeah. And I know we talked about that on the Biz Dad podcast and the most recent one. And I was in love with it then. I'm just as much in love with it now, of like, how do you become average? And, if the wrong person hears that, they'll think, oh, well, you're just trying to lower your, where you're at. And it's all about how can we raise up the people around us so that we're just average, I absolutely love that thought process, because you should be hiring everybody because they're better at the job than you are. And then if you're focused on, like you mentioned at the very beginning of all of this, if you're focused on your superpower and let everybody else focus on their superpower, then you're going to be the average guy, because everybody else is going to be up there crushing what they're really strongly capable of. So, Alan, I absolutely loved that. This was a phenomenal conversation. I greatly appreciate you coming on the Delegate That podcast and sharing your wisdom and knowledge with a bunch of the folks here. So if somebody's hearing this and there's like, man, I really want to reach out to Alan, maybe they're interested in investing, or maybe they're interested in your coaching, what's the best way for folks to reach out to you?
That's really simple now, is you can go to thealanunderwood.com, and whether it's investing, flying, coaching, public, keynote speaking, you're going to find the resources there, and a calendar link that doesn't require an assistant to get on my calendar.
There you go.
Although I'll be glad when she's back, but that's the easiest way, thealanunderwood.com.
Awesome. So thealanunderwood.com. Reach out to Alan if there's anything he can do to serve you. Alan, I thank you again very much for jumping on. Everybody listening, I greatly appreciate you listening to what we have here, the amazing guests that we bring in every week. If you have a potential guest, have them reach out to me. Share this podcast with somebody you think would get something out of this. Like and subscribe, comment, let us know what your favorite part is. All of that stuff I'm supposed to relay to you. Please do it all, because it makes a huge difference. So thank you all very much for listening. Thank you again, Alan. We will see everybody on the next show.